What can hold back India? I think, well, when China joined the WTO, it had almost 20 years of clear growth. Between 2001 November, when China joined the WTO in Doha, to the beginning of COVID in 2019, China's GDP grew 7 times in real terms, 9 times in renminbi terms, 11 times in US dollar terms. The Chinese themselves did not expect this, and it created great stresses in the global economy. India started 20 years later, and now it's less favorable. And Trump is threatening. If India, China, and ASEAN together work out a Panchsheel 2.0 and commend it to the world, it will take time, but people will begin to sign on. And we will create a certain moral momentum to treat one another in a more civilized way. When I was asked to give a title for my talk this evening, I thought with the way Trump is fast-forwarding the future, I should just have a general placeholder. So my topic became India in a New Asia, which is a little timeless. Trump is dramatic. My old boss, Robert Kwok, in Hong Kong, he's now 102 years old. One day he said to me, one reason to live long is that you get to wake up every morning and to read what Trump has said the night before. He has a robust constitution, but Trump, I think, for many of us, shoots up our cortisol level. The last 2 weeks is all about Venezuela. And hot on Venezuela's heels, Greenland, Cuba, and now Iran. What's happening? I think Trump is accelerating trends which were already underway for some time, which is the crystallization of a multipolar world. His is the first US administration to admit that this is a multipolar world. You know, Secretary Rubio said recently, apropos the war in Ukraine, this is not our war. It is on a different continent. Can you imagine the shock to the Europeans who, since February 2022, were being led on the charge against Russia by the US? The special operation, to use Russia's phrase, in Venezuela was brilliant, stunning. But it could not have been accomplished without collaboration inside Venezuela. And it's still not clear who collaborated and how. The initial nationalistic outpouring confuses the picture. So when Trump talked about taking control of Venezuela, I don't think it's that simple. Because this is where Simón Bolívar, who liberated large parts of South America from the Spaniards 200 years earlier, came from. And it's not just the elite. I had the pleasure one day of sitting next to Hugo Chavez. He was passing through Singapore and paid us a one-day visit. And Prime Minister kindly put me next to him. So I was able to grill him on his earlier escapades, a failed coup, imprisonment, and what his mission was. He had charisma, but little sense of economics. And under UN sanctions, by the time it became US sanctions, by the time it came to Maduro, the economy was ran to the ground. It was Cuba which provided healthcare, and much of the administrative capability in return for Venezuelan oil. I don't know how the US is going to manage this. There's no full regime change. There is a leadership change. And they can't go back because too much has been invested. This will be an entanglement. Trump's objective from the first days of his second administration has been very clear. He wants Canada to be the 51st state. He wants Greenland. He wants to take back the Panama Canal. And he renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. This is because, knowing that the US has overextended, he is effecting a gentle retreat and consolidating his own hemisphere. Now, if he succeeds, Greenland, North America, Central America, the northern part of South America, that is an incredible sphere with 3 oceans, enormous resources. And if he adds to his balance sheet, US balance sheet, Canada, Greenland, Venezuela, the $38 trillion fiscal deficit will look entirely manageable. In the National Security Strategy paper that they issued under Trump's name just a few weeks ago, they spelled it out quite clearly. It will absorb a lot of their nervous energy and a considerable amount of the military resources because they are blockading not just Venezuela, but later on Nicaragua and Cuba as well. This retreat has huge consequences for the rest of the world. I don't think the rupture with Europe can be repaired. He was asked, Greenland at the expense of NATO? He did not give a clear answer. Implication was, if need be. And even if there's a negotiated outcome, European leaders know that looking ahead, they have to stand on their own, build up their own army, and be more autonomous. Not to give up links to North America, but to depend much less on it. And each will calculate more selfishly. And in the end, they will have to live with Russia. There's no escaping now, Ukraine being partitioned. In East Asia, Trump was asked, what if Xi Jinping were to do to Taiwan what you did to Venezuela? His reply was, that's for Xi Jinping to decide. He knows I'll be unhappy. This is like a thunderbolt hitting the Taiwanese people. They thought they had American backing. And here Trump said he would be unhappy. That's all. Of course, the Americans know that if there's war over Taiwan, they are not likely to prevail because Taiwan is too close to the Chinese mainland. And America's power projection requires the aircraft carriers to come up close. And Chinese hypersonic missiles can hit all of them, in fact, all the way to Guam. And even if they embark on this adventure, TSMC in Taiwan will be destroyed. And with it, the supply of NVIDIA chips. China has alternatives, maybe poor alternatives, but it's less dependent on NVIDIA chips than the rest of the world. And in fact, part of US strategy is to deny China the most advanced NVIDIA chips. When I was in Tokyo, I flew to Delhi from Tokyo last Sunday, chatting with some people, a senior business executive, with some seriousness. He said, the Chinese could have colluded with the Americans to draw Maduro from his safe house, because Xi Jinping envoy met Maduro a few hours before the US special operation. Draw him out, leave, and the US came in and nabbed him. I was shocked that the Japanese should imagine such a conspiracy theory. But that is the mood now. So you retreat to your hemisphere, the Europeans are on their own. Are you conceding East Asia to China? Will China introduce a Monroe Doctrine for East Asia? I don't think that will happen. To begin with, this is not the way the Chinese think. The Chinese, throughout their history, build walls around themselves. They love walls. And they build walls for all kinds of things. Not just physical walls, but walls for movies, for books, for capital markets, the internet. And during COVID, the most impressive of all, the Great Biological Wall of China, enabling China to be the last country to open up. China is homogeneous, over 92% Han, not without reason. They find it difficult to govern non-Chinese people. Chinese people may complain, in the end they'll comply. And there's a long history, a statecraft going back centuries. And if you start bringing in large numbers of foreigners, if Beijing becomes like New York or Shanghai like London or Paris, the Chinese Communist Party will find China ungovernable. So during COVID, the foreigners couldn't take it, they left. The Chinese stayed behind, they stuck it out. Sometimes they joke about it. The Shanghainese were traumatized, but life goes on. That's China. In any case, the Indo-Pacific Command in Honolulu has been there for a long time, and they're not going to go anywhere. I mean, the US fought the Second World War victoriously. The Korean War to a standstill. Was defeated in Vietnam. But their presence on the Western Pacific was gained by blood and treasure. In Japan today, there's still over 50,000 American soldiers. In Korea, over 20,000. So when we talk about a consolidation to the Western Hemisphere, it is relative. But for the immediate future, I think US-China relations have been stabilized. And the principal reason for this is rare earths. Trump, after Liberation Day, expected everybody to line up and kiss his backside. Of course, China just looked the other way. So to India. Smaller countries had no choice. We all had to line up in ASEAN and hope for the best. They kept piling on the pressure on China. In the end, China had to play a card which they did not want to play, which was rare earths. It was already open on the poker table in 1992, when Deng Xiaoping said, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. They know that the moment you use a card, it begins to lose its value. The Americans are now scrambling to become less dependent on China. The rare earths are 17 elements in the periodic table, 15 in the lanthanum group. The lighter rare earths are found everywhere in the world. And after 5-7 years, you can develop the processing capability. But the heavy rare earths, those further on the periodic table, like dysprosium and terbium, which are needed for the high-quality magnets you need to make F-35 fighters and bunker buster bombs and missiles. These elements are only found in China and in the part of Myanmar neighboring China. So China now has a chokehold on the US. Besson, when the Chinese reacted, was so upset in Switzerland. But in the end, they had to confront reality. Trump, ever the businessman, he then said, God bless the US and China. Well, I hope God will bless all of us. But for him to say that reflected an encounter with reality. And he'll go to China in April, there'll be some settlement. And because this chokehold is good for at least another maybe 10 years, I think there'll be stability. Unless China does something egregious, which I don't think China would, because they much prefer to have peaceful unification with Taiwan. And after Trump's remark that it all depends on Xi Jinping, I think the thinking in Taiwan will change. China is going through a difficult period, and the mood is a bit down because of real estate. They punctured the bubble, which was an enormous bubble, and it'll take 10 years for it to be massaged out of the system. China is also restructuring industry in a profound way. And you have to visit China regularly to see the things that are happening. I'm an advisor to Huawei in Singapore. A few years ago, Huawei's catchword was cloud everywhere. A few years ago, they changed it to intelligence everywhere. Intelligence everywhere means edge intelligence, sensors. And in AI, and this was articulated by the founder of Huawei, China is taking a trajectory divergent from the US. They made a strategic decision to make large language models open source. Whereas the Magnificent Seven in America, their valuation makes up 1/3 of the US stock market. They need the revenue flows, which means proprietary knowledge. You use them, you pay. In China, it's free. So when you apply that public good to a specific need, like for mining or for anticipating building failures, which would then be proprietary to you, you do not have to invest in the large language models, which are horrendously expensive. So when Sam Altman came to this country and met Indian entrepreneurs, and they asked about India's chances, he said, don't waste your time. There's no way you can catch up, because it was proprietary. Then when China made DeepSeek, and now Q1 by Alibaba, also open source, all of us are in the game, including Singapore, Brunei, Laos, and of course India, without having to invest enormous resources in large language models. As a result of this in China, AI is being applied in all industries across the length and breadth of the country. I went to this place where they make toys in June, and there they were already inserting it so that the doll can recognize you and respond to you. By next year, for Christmas, there'll be little robots we give to one another. It's changing that fast. And I've been watching the exoskeletons that are now available. You know, many of us are getting, we have ankle problem, knee problem, hip problem, mobility problems. In the case of India, diabetes will be a big problem. There'll be amputations. These exoskeletons will extend our mobility for many years. They're getting lighter, cheaper, and smarter, which means you strap it on, it quickly responds to you because AI is built in. And you can be sure that in China, many companies will be competing with one another to make better models. The same kind of intense competition you find in solar panels, in motor cars, in drones, in robots. And I've been watching the humanoid robots. I do Tai Chi, which requires a lot of exercise and practice over years. It's unbelievable how quickly the humanoid robots are learning. At first, I thought, okay, not bad. Then they started doing backflips. They fell, they got up immediately. Then 2 months ago, a Taiwanese singer I know, he was performing in Chengdu. He had male dancers, female dancers, and robot dancers. And the robots all did perfect backflips. So within 6 months, the progress is astonishing. In another 6 months, even if your martial arts is very good, don't tangle with a robot. And this is a revolution in every sector of industry, in the economy, and in defense. This revolution will transform the way we see ourselves and create enormous stresses in human society. But because China and the US, I think we have stable relations. And we in ASEAN, our trade with China reached $1 trillion last year, have kind of learned how to manage China, to ride on China's growth, but not be in China's grasp. It requires a little bit of agility. And in this movement, naturally, we look to India as a counterbalance. But the relations between ASEAN and India are way below potential. In Singapore, we sensed it some time ago. When Narasimha Rao, faced with an impossible fiscal situation, took India on a different path of economic reform. I think it was in October 1991. Chidambaram as a commerce minister, Manmohan Singh as finance minister, gave a seminar, which is still remembered in Singapore today. And suddenly, our ears pricked. Is something happening? In early 1993, I led what was for Singapore a very big business delegation to visit India. And the country was in early ferment. We could feel it. In 1994, the Bangalore IT Park was established with the Tata Group. And we were asked if we could help renovate or build a new airport for Bangalore. You know, we reported to Lee Kuan Yew. He was skeptical. Because sometimes when you know too much, it's hard to see this continuity. I remember once when Rahul Gandhi called on him. He looked at Rahul, he said, I know your father, I know your grandmother, I know your great-grandfather. He was not patronizing Rahul. He was making the point that he had a longitudinal knowledge of India. So Kishore wrote the report of our 93 visit and was scolded for it. And whenever there was something negative about India, Lee Kuan Yew would send it to me. But at the same time, every time I visited India, he would debrief me. He wanted to know what was really happening. He's not an easy man to convince, but he was intellectually honest. And he was eventually persuaded that things were happening in this country. And we took a long approach. In 1994, together with Human Resource Minister Arjun Singh, we had the biggest exhibition of India in Singapore called Alamkar. Till today, still the most important exhibition India has ever had in Singapore. Then, when Vajpayee was Prime Minister. Goh Chok Tong, the second Prime Minister in Singapore, was always favorably disposed towards India. He gave speeches saying that, no, we need two wings. China is one wing, but we need the other wing too, which will have to be India. So he and Vajpayee talk about a free trade agreement. PM Goh asked me. I asked my officials. My officials said it'd be a waste of time. There'd be a lot of talk and nothing. I conveyed that to Goh Chok Tong. Goh Chok Tong related to Vajpayee. Vajpayee was upset. And he told Arun Shourie, who was in his delegation, he said, you go and speak to George. So we had breakfast. I repeated the position. Arun said, I'll prove you wrong. And he proved us wrong. Because we had a very substantial, comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. It was negotiated with the BJP government, concluded with the Congress government. I had taken the precaution while negotiating with the BJP government to brief Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi. And they pledged their full support. So when the change came, it was smooth. And since then, we've been trying to pull the whole of ASEAN closer to India with limited success. To me, this is an imperative. India's growth is organic and self-sustaining. I understood it at one level as a minister. When I lost the elections in 2011 and went to the private sector, I ran a logistics company in Hong Kong and pushed for investments in India. So we found a partner in Chennai, INDEF, Roman Catholic, and it's done well. And I could see that ports, airports, IT parks, telecommunications were improving. There were borders separating states. They're all gradually open up. So from the logistics point of view, from the movement of freight to India and within India, I could see that this growth is organic. So maybe looking back, Deng Xiaoping, when they gave him credit for opening up China, he said, I only opened the door because millions of people behind me were pushing me to open the door. I think millions of people were telling Narasimha Rao, open the door. And what we are seeing is a process ongoing for many years, sometimes helped by government, sometimes impeded by government, but unstoppable. I got involved with Nalanda University. Advani was in Singapore. I was a minister in attendance to him. He asked for my views, so I suggested that he promote Buddhist tourism. He got Jack Mohan to come and see me. So I attended the dedication of the Mahabodhi Mahavihara in 2002 in Bodh Gaya. I went to Sarnath. And then I learned about Nalanda. So later, when Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who was deputy head of planning commission, came to Singapore, we had dinner by the Singapore River. I said, why not we resurrect Nalanda as an East Asia university? I was excited, he was excited. He said, write me a paper, which I rapidly did, sent it to him. Mon Mohan saw it, got Amartya Sen to head a mentors group. And then after a few years, legislation was passed with unanimous support in both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. Amartya became the first chancellor, I became the second chancellor, and had the honor of presiding over the first convocation, the first after 800 years. And it brought together the entire region. But during that period, I was going up and down the country roads of Bihar between Rajgir and Patna. And I could see that, hey, things are getting better. The fields greener, the animals furrier, the saris brighter, the shops fuller. Yes, Lalu Prasad did a lot, but it's in the soil. It wants to grow. I'm quite sure now if I go back to Bihar, it'll be a very different Bihar. Just as today when Singaporeans come to India and they say, oh, very nice airports. Well, they did not know what Indian airports were like 20 years ago. And now highways everywhere, traffic jams everywhere because of highway construction, subway construction. And telecommunications have improved. Ada, now everyone absorbed into the national and international marketplace. So India is on the move. And India's relations with China, which are improving, will be an important part of this story because there's great complementarity between the two countries. I'll talk about this a bit more later. So I asked myself, what can hold back India? I said, well, when China joined the WTO, it had almost 20 years of clear growth. Between 2001 November, when China joined the WTO in Doha, to the beginning of COVID in 2019, China's GDP grew 7 times in real terms, 9 times in renminbi terms, 11 times in US dollar terms. The Chinese themselves did not expect this. And it created great stresses in the global economy. India started 20 years later. And now it's less favorable. And Trump is threatening draconian tariffs on India. I don't know how the Indian government is going to negotiate this. You can't show weakness, because if you show weakness, then that's the end of you. But you have to be flexible and practical. If they're losing interest in Ukraine, I think India's purchase of oil from Russia will eventually become less important to the Americans. But it's important, even if it costs some, to be firm now so that you establish reputation. And India must find other ways, channels to trade and make a living. Southeast Asia, China, Africa will all be important. I understand why India pulled out from the RCEP at the last moment, because of farmers, because of fear that China's manufacturers will swamp India. Tarun Das from CII doesn't agree. He gave me lunch yesterday. But there is that fear. I think eventually India will join RCEP. But RCEP itself is evolving. So it's important that it's evolving in a way which allows India to hop on when the time comes. So I've been publicly calling for an RCEP at the political level, ASEAN plus 6, which includes India, which sets directions for the free trade agreement. And then India, in its own time, can join, and on terms negotiated, taking into account India's domestic needs. This is very important because the economies of India, China, and Southeast Asia combined is more than half the world, and the faster growing half of the world, which means that if we maintain the peace and have economic development for another generation, this region will pull the whole world along. Then for India, I've been to Bhutan, I've been to Pakistan, Sri Lanka. India's relationship in the region is sometimes a little prickly. I think it's inevitable because partition was unnatural. Partition first of India and Pakistan, and then Pakistan, Bangladesh. Suddenly, in one generation, 2 generations, a Westphalian system forced upon a civilization. That suddenly your relationship to one another has to be between countries, which can continue to trade but cannot interfere with one another. It will take time. What we hope for is that in this period, when interstate relations are evolving, to keep the temperature as low as possible, to avoid big conflicts, and therefore to concentrate on economic development. And in the end, it is economic development which determines a country's strength. The problem today is, because of technology, AI, globalization, as we grow fast, social stresses increase within the country, and sometimes can be very difficult. So towards AI, for instance, there'll be a differential response. In many countries, there'll be a Luddite reaction, saying, look, don't introduce this, it's causing unemployment, it's disrupting existing industries, slow down, hold back. While countries are able to keep their social system soft, they will streak ahead. So India, with states, ethnicities, different religions, castes, we have to work very hard to keep the Gini coefficient decent and make sure that the poor are helped. The Aadhaar card will certainly help. And this is the biggest political challenge in India today, which is how do you keep the different parts bound together enough so that the economic development will not be held back. Then from my perspective in Singapore, another key challenge for India is urban development. Because as you grow, the farmers will come to the cities. And if you're not careful, the jams will grow, the pollution will get worse, the cities become unlivable. So the earlier the cities plan ahead and anticipate problems, the more they can prepare for the future at lower cost. And in this area of municipal governance, there is much for Singapore and Indian cities to work together. To learn from Singapore's successes and also from its mistakes. Of course, Singapore has an advantage that it's autonomous. But we don't have space, whereas you have space in India. So there are things you can do, we can't do in Singapore. Every Chinese city studies Singapore. Sometimes we don't benefit from it because we are spawning competitors to ourselves. I think we will have a similar role in India. Some airports in India, I'm told, are better than Changi. Why can't Indian cities in some areas also be as good or overtake Singapore? I mean, years ago, I went to Jamshedpur, and what the Tatas did, they had portable drinking water from the tap. They introduced social security. Jamshedpur was a planned city. Indian cities can be planned. The laws can be modified, new legislation. Because when people see other cities making progress, then they want the same for themselves. I make this last point with self-interest because Singapore will benefit from it. And we'll balance closer to Singapore. But it's also a serious point because livability is a very important part of the future, of living in a knowledge, data-driven economy. India-China relations, I think, are on the mend. Galwan Valley was a turning point for the worse. I listened to both sides. I sympathize with both sides. India took the opportunity to pivot. America wanted it because it saw China as a main challenge. This got the Chinese very suspicious because they saw in India's reaction a strategic move against China. So Chinese companies were expelled, flights were stopped, links were cut. On the Chinese side, they have been measured because it's in their interest to have good relations with India. The 62 war is still remembered in India as if it happened recently. It's largely forgotten in China. So this is a problem, and this explains the asymmetry of response. Then February 2022, Russia moved into Ukraine. America and Europe wanted India to support Ukraine and disavow Russia. How could India do that? I mean, India's relationship with Russia goes back a very long time. You buy the military equipment. It's an old friendship, which you cannot turn against. So sorry. Then, after Pahalgam, the Indo-Pakistan short war, India wanted the US to support India against Pakistan. Trump invited the Pakistani army chief to the White House, gave him lunch, and got him to nominate him for the Nobel Prize. So this is an adult relationship. And not surprisingly, India and China now say, both sides agree that it's in their mutual interest to find a way, lower temperature at the border, move forward. Of course, does China wish India well? I mean, that is a question we must ask ourselves. It's like between Singapore and Malaysia, sometimes we ask ourselves, does Malaysia wish us well? And Malaysia asks itself, does Singapore wish us well? Yes, but maybe not too well. Because then it becomes a problem. But between now and that theoretical future, there's so much to be gained by working together. So I think bit by bit, things will improve. 2 months ago, I went to Beijing for a conference. I think Sham Saran was there. This was the Tianjin Peace Forum. And I went to Changi Airport, gate 20, so I walked up to gate 20. I looked into the glass enclosure. I said, oh, must be the wrong gate, because they're all Indians inside. I said, no, it's the right gate. So there must have been, because at that time, there's still not many direct flights. So they were turning around in Singapore. So I started doing some social investigation. Some were businessmen, many were tourists. So there's a pent-up demand, both ways. And China has now issued large numbers of visas for Indians to go to China. And they're hoping that India will do the same, which I think India should, because what is the harm? And there's this Reuters report that India may allow Chinese companies to take part in public tenders. I hope it's true. Because if it's true, then there is a strong signal to everybody that things are on the mend. In 2010, I was in Tibet as foreign minister. And I was being driven from Lhasa to Shikatse. Along the way, we reached the nearest point to the Natula Pass. The Chinese they said, I hope one day we'll build a road to Calcutta. I look at the map, it's a short distance. That's how the British went to Lhasa, via the Natula Pass. I know on the Indian side, the strategic thinkers, the boffins, they say, oh, no, we have the chicken neck there, the Siliguri corridor, it's very dangerous. I was from the military before, so I'm not so easily impressed by these arguments. There are so many ways to seal up the Natula Pass if there's an emergency. And until there's an emergency, you can let the trade flow. Hundreds of millions of Chinese will benefit, and Calcutta will boom. Now, it's not something for the immediate future, but something to be imagined is step-by-step relations improve. And each can add considerably to the GDP of the other. And the entire region will move with you. No, for us in Southeast Asia, when there are quarrels between India and China, it's like father and mother quarreling, We feel great pain. No, even among retired MPs, we have a WhatsApp group. And when Galwan happened, Chinese and Muslim MPs took different sides. And the postings became more and more angry until someone said, hey, please, we're all PAP members. Can we not discuss this subject? And since then, we've not been discussing India-China relations. Wang Gengwu, the famous professor, he said, Southeast Asia, where the mandalas of India and China intersect. And they intersect mostest in Singapore. Therefore, if relations improve, you can be sure that we will cheer both sides on and facilitate wherever possible. And this will make this a better world. Not just for the region, but for the rest of the world, as it becomes more multipolar. This is a Deshmukh lecture, and I've been reading up on C.D. Deshmukh, his life, what he stood for, what he espoused, what he embodied. And I feel emboldened to make a suggestion. In 2 years ago, was the 50th anniversary of Panchsheel, what the Chinese call the 5 Principles. China had a commemoration event. I followed it closely. India, because relations were at an ebb, did not take part. I don't know if India was even invited. I must ask Minister Jaishankar afterwards. But it was, half of it was missing. You can't celebrate a wedding anniversary if the other party didn't attend. And Panchsheel gave birth to the 10 principles issued in the Afro-Asian conference in Bandung the following year, and provided the philosophical basis of the non-aligned movement when it was launched in Yugoslavia in 1961. Now let's think about it. The 5 principles. Mutual respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, trade, economic benefit, mutual non-interference, peaceful coexistence, the 5 principles. These are the principles humanity needs for the 21st century in a multipolar world. We have to add new things like ecology. So perhaps it may be possible if India, China, and ASEAN together work out a Panchsheel 2.0 and commend it to the world. It will take time, but people will begin to sign on. And we will create a certain moral momentum to treat one another in a more civilized way. We are ancient peoples. Therefore, we know that you can't change me, I can't change you. But you are worthy of respect. You may have your prejudices, but each is worthy of respect and regard. Something to think about, and something perhaps to be proposed at an event which remembers civilization.